Laura thought the silence was the first thing she'd notice. She had imagined it on the flight back. The deep, satisfying quiet of a home temporarily emptied of its other occupant. A space she could reclaim as entirely her own for a few precious hours before he returned from whatever mundane task filled his day. She pictured herself dropping her bags, the sound echoing in the marble foyer, and breathing in an air that felt lighter, freer, an air without him. What she noticed instead was the emptiness. It wasn't an auditory void, but a visual one. A stark, gaping hole where there should have been substance. The taxi had pulled away from the curb, its engine noise fading into the late afternoon hum of the exclusive suburban neighborhood, leaving her standing on the pristine flagstone path. She looked at the driveway. Her pearlescent white Range Rover, the one she'd painstakingly customized, was gone. That was odd. Liam must have taken it for servicing, though he knew she hated him driving it. His own car, a sensible and profoundly boring gray sedan, was also missing. The three-car garage, whose doors were usually shut tight, stood agape, a dark, hollow mouth revealing nothing but bare concrete. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced a line up her spine. It was an unfamiliar sensation. Her life was curated to be free of such vulgar feelings. Annoyance, yes. Disdain, frequently. But the raw, animal instinct of wrongness? That was for other people. She dismissed it. An overreaction from jet lag. Liam had probably put both cars in for a full detailing as a welcome home surprise. It was the sort of pathetic, servile gesture he was fond of. She walked toward the grand, dark oak doors, fumbling in her purse for her keys. The solid brass handle felt cold beneath her touch. She slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again, jiggling it with rising frustration. Nothing. It met a solid, unyielding resistance. It was the wrong key. But it wasn't. It was the only key she had. She stared at the intricate carving on the door, a custom design her father had sneered at as new money, even though it was Liam who had paid for it. Everything was paid for by Liam, a fact that was both a source of constant, grating irritation and the fundamental bedrock of her comfortable existence. Panic began to bubble in her chest, hot and acidic. She pressed the doorbell, the melodic chimes echoing strangely from within. She waited. Nothing. She pressed it again, holding her finger down until the chimes became a continuous, manic peal. Still nothing. Through the leaded glass panels flanking the door, she could see only darkness. The grand chandelier that normally illuminated the foyer was unlit. This was when the silence finally registered. Not the peaceful silence she had anticipated, but a dead, profound stillness. The house didn't feel empty. It felt erased. A chain of events was about to unfold that Laura could never have predicted. A reckoning that had been meticulously planned in the very quiet she so often used to belittle the man she had married. She believed her world was built on the foundations of her family's name and her own innate superiority. She didn't know her world was a stage, and the man she considered a mere stagehand was in fact the sole architect of the entire production. Within the next hour, the curtain would fall, and she would find herself standing on a bare, empty floor, the applause replaced by a silence more devastating than any shouting match. We love hearing stories about people getting exactly what they deserve. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to reveal a hidden strength? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you enjoy seeing arrogance meet its match, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of satisfying justice. Now, let's see how this all began. 4 weeks earlier, the humiliation had been served alongside the pan-seared scallops. It was Sunday dinner at her parents' estate, a weekly ritual that Liam had once called a command performance in a rare moment of unguarded wit. Laura had quickly corrected him. It was a privilege. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, did not grant audiences to just anyone. Liam sat silently, a model of placid composure, as Richard held court at the head of the long mahogany table. Richard was a man who had mistaken inherited wealth for personal virtue. He spoke in pronouncements, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no. "The market's volatile," Richard declared, swirling the Bordeaux in his glass. "It takes a real man to navigate it, not someone tinkering with blueprints." He gestured vaguely in Liam's direction, the dismissal as sharp as a slap. Liam didn't react. He simply cut a small piece of his scallop, his movements precise and economical. His lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Richard more than any argument would have. "I mean, architecture," Richard continued, looking at Laura as if Liam weren't even there. "It's a respectable hobby, I suppose, but it's not a business. Not really, it's quaint." Laura laughed, a light tinkling sound that she knew would please her father. "Oh, Daddy, be nice. Liam tries his best. His little firm is very important to him." The word little was a deliberate pinprick. Liam's firm, Orion Design Solutions, was a source of constant, low-grade shame for her. It wasn't a sprawling corporate entity with a nameplate on a skyscraper. It was a boutique consultancy he ran from a modest, albeit stylish, downtown office. In her world, if your business wasn't a household name, it was a failure. Liam finally looked up, his gaze meeting Richard's. His eyes were a calm, steady gray, and they held a depth that always vaguely unsettled them. It was like looking into still water and not knowing if it was a foot deep or 1,000. "The market has its own architecture, Richard," Liam said, his voice even. "If you don't understand the foundation, the entire structure can collapse." Richard scoffed. "Spare me the metaphors, son. I deal in real numbers, real assets. You draw pretty pictures." Eleanor, who had been silently observing the exchange with an air of detached amusement, finally chimed in. "Now, Richard, don't be a bully. Laura, darling, tell us about your trip. Aspen, isn't it? A girl's trip?" Laura seized the conversational lifeline. "Yes, just a week of spas, skiing, and absolutely no men," she said, winking. "Amber and Chloe are coming. We've rented a gorgeous chalet just outside of town. It's going to be divine." Liam watched her as she spoke, her face animated, her eyes alight with an excitement he knew was entirely manufactured for her parents' benefit. He knew she wasn't going with Amber and Chloe. Amber was in Singapore on business, and Chloe was visiting her ailing mother in Florida. He knew this because he had checked. He also knew that the chalet she spoke of didn't exist. He knew exactly where she was going and with whom. His hand, resting on his lap beneath the table, brushed against the smooth leather of a small, unassuming journal he always carried in his briefcase. It was his private ledger, not of numbers, but of moments. A catalog of slights, of condescending remarks, of casual cruelties. Each one was an entry, a data point in a long and patient analysis. Tonight's dinner had provided several new entries. He felt a strange sense of detachment, the way a scientist might observe a chemical reaction. He wasn't feeling anger in that moment, not the hot, blinding rage that Richard's taunts were designed to provoke. Instead, he felt a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was an architect, after all. He understood that before you can build something new, you must first survey the old structure, identify its weaknesses, and plan for a controlled demolition. The Vances, Laura included, believed they were living in a fortress. They had no idea they were residing in a house of cards, and he was the only one who knew where the wind was coming from. He took a sip of water, the cool liquid a balm to the dry theatricality of the room. He looked around at the opulent dining room, at the heavy silk curtains and the ridiculously oversized oil portraits of Vance's ancestors. He had designed this wing of the house for them 5 years ago, a project he'd done as a favor, a gift. It was a detail they had long since forgotten, or perhaps chosen to ignore, because it didn't fit the narrative of Liam, the charity case, the man who had married up. They didn't remember him standing on the muddy foundation, directing the construction crew, solving a complex structural problem that had stumped their expensive contractor. They only saw the man who sat quietly at their table, the man who was so easy to underestimate, and in their blindness lay his greatest strength. The conversation had moved on. Laura was now describing the designer ski wear she had purchased, her voice dripping with brand names. Liam let the sound wash over him. He was already thinking about his own plans. Not of revenge precisely. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. This was different. This was a correction. A realignment of a universe that had been knocked off its axis. It was, in its own way, a design project, the most complex and important one of his life. The day Laura left for her trip was a symphony of carefully orchestrated chaos. 3 oversized suitcases, each bearing the logo of a luxury brand, stood in the foyer like monoliths to her self-importance. She swept through the house, issuing last-minute instructions with the air of a general deploying troops for a complex campaign. The thermostat is not to be touched, Liam. I've set it to the perfect ambient temperature for the upholstery. The cleaning service comes on Wednesday. Make sure you're out of the house. They don't like to be watched. And for heaven's sake, don't try to cook anything complicated. I've left you enough microwave meals to last the week. It's probably for the best. Each directive was a small, polished stone of condescension, tossed casually in his direction. He simply nodded, his expression placid. Of course. Have a safe flight. She paused at the door, turning to look at him. For a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. Was it guilt? Doubt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual mask of careless superiority. Try not to miss me too much, she said, the words meant to sound affectionate, but landing with the thud of an obligation. She kissed the air an inch from his cheek, and then she was gone, the click of the closing door echoing in the sudden silence. Liam stood motionless in the foyer for a full minute, listening to the sound of her Range Rover's engine starting and then fading into the distance. The house, which had been buzzing with her frantic energy, settled into a profound quiet. He walked to the large picture window in the living room and watched until the white vehicle was completely out of sight. The moment it vanished, the placid mask he wore dissolved. His posture straightened, and a look of intense, focused energy replaced the mildness in his eyes. He walked not to the kitchen to inspect the pathetic array of microwave meals, but to his study. The room was his sanctuary, the one space in the house that was unapologetically his. It was minimalist and functional, filled with books on structural engineering, philosophy, and economic theory. On his large, clean desk sat his laptop and the leather-bound journal. He opened the journal. The pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting. It was not a diary of feelings, but a project log. Timelines, contact lists, financial projections, and legal frameworks. The entry at the top of the current page was simple. Project Liberation, Phase 1, commence. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. Arthur, Liam said, his voice devoid of the gentle deference it carried in the presence of his wife and her family. It was crisp, authoritative. She's gone. It's time. Everything is in place, Liam, came the calm, professional voice on the other end. Arthur Vance, no relation to Laura's family, a fact of cosmic irony that pleased Liam immensely, was his attorney, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a mind like a steel trap. The holding companies are ready. The transfer orders are signed and waiting for execution. Are you certain about the timeline? I am, Liam said. Let's start with the Vance Industries portfolio. I want our shares divested by market close on Wednesday. Quietly if possible, but speed is the priority. It will cause a significant drop in their stock value, Liam. Richard will notice. That's the point, Arthur. He needs to feel the ground shift before the floor gives way. Understood. And the house? Liam looked around the living room, his gaze sweeping over the objects Laura had chosen with such meticulous care. The oversized abstract painting she'd bought at a charity auction, not because she liked it, but because of who would see it. The custom-made sofa that was deeply uncomfortable, but photographed beautifully. The collection of meaningless glass sculptures. It was a museum of their marriage, all surface, no substance. The removal teams are scheduled for Friday morning. Everything is to be put into a climate-controlled storage unit. The title is clear, correct? Exclusively in your name. The property was purchased with funds from your premarital accounts. She was never on the deed. Good, Liam said. He thought of Laura, imagining her at the airport, probably posting a selfie with a caption about much-needed girl time and the hashtag Aspen. In reality, she would be boarding a flight to the Maldives, a 14-hour journey to meet Mark, the smarmy real estate developer she thought was her secret. Liam had known about Mark for 6 months. Mark was just a symptom, not the disease. The disease was a profound lack of character, a hollowness that no amount of money or status could ever fill. After the call with Arthur, he made another. This one was to a financial advisor in Zurich, and another to a logistics expert. The calls were short, precise, and efficient. He was like a general moving his pieces into position on a chessboard, his strategy long planned, his every move calculated. For 5 years he had played the part of the pawn, allowing himself to be moved, to be sacrificed, to be underestimated. They never realized he was the one controlling the entire game. As dusk fell, Liam sat in his study, the house dark around him, save for the glow of his monitor displaying complex financial charts. He wasn't fueled by rage. Rage was a fire that consumed itself. This was colder, more enduring. It was the feeling an architect gets when he looks at a condemned, unsafe structure. There is no anger toward the building itself, only a clear, professional understanding that it must come down, for the safety of everyone and for the integrity of the landscape. His marriage and the entire false edifice of the Vance family's superiority was that condemned building, and he was about to pull the lever on the detonator. The week passed in a blur of focused activity. While Laura was sending him photos of snow-capped mountains, stock images downloaded from the internet, he noted with a wry smile, and texting him complaints about the poor Wi-Fi in her chalet, Liam was systematically dismantling the life she knew. On Wednesday, as instructed, Vance Industries stock began to plummet. It started as a trickle, a few large, anonymous block trades that spooked the market. By midday, it was a torrent. Liam watched the ticker on his screen, a cascade of red numbers. He felt a grim satisfaction as he imagined Richard Vance's phone ringing off the hook, his blustering confidence curdling into panic. Richard would be blaming the market, a recession, a political scandal, anything but the quiet man he'd insulted over dinner just days before. On Friday, the moving trucks arrived. They were not a local company, but a specialized firm that handled art and high-value assets. The crew was professional, silent, and efficient. They moved through the house with practiced ease, wrapping the glass sculptures in foam, crating the oversized paintings, and disassembling the custom furniture. Liam supervised the entire process, not with sentimentality, but with the detached eye of a project manager. He watched as they lifted the massive, ornate mirror from the foyer wall. Laura had loved that mirror. She would stand before it every morning, adjusting her clothes, her hair, her expression, constructing the persona she would present to the world. As the movers carried it out, Liam saw his own reflection for a moment. A man in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his face calm, his eyes resolute. The house felt larger, emptier, as the mirror departed. It felt more honest. By late afternoon, the house was a hollow shell. Every trace of Laura's opulent taste had been removed. All that remained was his furniture from the apartment he'd lived in before they were married. A simple, comfortable leather armchair, a solid wooden desk, a few bookshelves. He had kept them in storage, a contingency he hoped he would never need, but for which he was nevertheless prepared. That evening, he received a call from Laura. He saw her name flash on the screen and let it ring 3 times before answering. "Liam? Hi. she said. Her voice was bright, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Strain. Laura, is everything okay in Aspen? He asked, his tone perfectly pitched to convey mild, husbandly concern. Oh, it's fabulous, she lied smoothly. The snow is just incredible. We went skiing all day. My legs are absolutely killing me. In the background, he could hear a faint, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the crackling of a fireplace. It was the gentle, unmistakable sound of waves lapping against a shore. A shore in the Maldives, to be precise. He had already seen the credit card charge for the overwater bungalow at the St. Regis. Sounds wonderful, he said. Are you getting enough rest? Trying to, she said with a little laugh. But there's so much to do. We're going to this amazing restaurant tonight, up on the mountain. You have to take a gondola to get to it. A complete fabrication, woven from the air. Be careful, he said. Always, she purred. There was a pause. Listen, something strange happened. My Amex was declined when I was buying a new ski jacket. Here it comes, he thought, the first tremor. That's odd, he said, feigning surprise. Did you call the company? I did. They said the account was closed. Daddy is furious. He said his company's stock took a nosedive this week for no reason. He thinks someone is targeting him. It's all very stressful. I'm sure it's just a clerical error, Laura. Don't worry about it. Just use your visa. He knew, of course, that her visa had also been canceled that morning. She just hadn't discovered it yet. I will, she said, though her voice had lost some of its breezy confidence. I just wanted to check in. I'm glad you did. I miss you, he said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but they were a necessary part of the performance. Miss you too, she replied, the sentiment sounding automatic, hollow. I'll see you Sunday. After he hung up, Liam sat in the cavernous, empty living room, the silence amplifying the hum of the refrigerator. He felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sense of finality. He had given her every chance to be a partner, to be a friend, to be a decent human being. He had offered her a genuine life, and she had treated it as a temporary convenience. She and her family saw him as a stepping stone, a resource to be exploited. They had mistaken his patience for weakness, his quietness for a lack of substance. He walked through the echoing rooms of the house he had built, the house he had paid for, the house that had become a gilded cage. He ran his hand along a bare wall where a gaudy painting had once hung. He wasn't destroying her life. He was merely taking away the props. He was leaving her with nothing but herself, forcing her, for the first time, to stand on her own stage and see if she had a character worth watching. He suspected she would not. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain had begun to fall, and a hurricane was about to make landfall. And so we return to the moment of arrival. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, indifferent backdrop to the ugly confusion churning inside Laura. The taxi was a distant memory. Her suitcases stood on the flagstone path like abandoned children, and the house before her remained a dark, impenetrable fortress. Her frustration finally boiled over into a raw, primal anger. She hammered on the door with her fist, the blows echoing with a dull thud. Liam! Liam, open this door right now! I know you're in there. This isn't funny. Silence was her only answer. Tears of rage and helplessness pricked at her eyes. She was Laura Vance. Things like this did not happen to her. The world bent to her will, not the other way around. She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen to call him, but then she saw it. A small, almost invisible detail she had missed in her initial panic. Tucked into the brass mail slot was the corner of a plain white envelope. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. Her name was written on the front in Liam's familiar, precise script. No dearest, no darling, just Laura. She tore it open. Inside was not a letter but a single, newly cut key. It was a standard, simple key, nothing like the heavy, ornate one she had on her keychain. Beneath it, a single line of text was printed on the paper. Your old key was a copy. This is the original. A cold dread, far deeper than her earlier unease, settled in her stomach. A copy? What did that mean? Confused and unnerved, she slid the new key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click. The heavy oak door swung inward, opening into a chasm of darkness. She hesitated on the threshold, her bravado evaporating. The house felt alien, hostile. "Liam?" she called out, her voice small and tentative in the vast emptiness. She stepped inside, her heels clicking loudly on the bare marble floor. She fumbled for the light switch, her fingers finding the familiar brass plate. She flicked it on, and her world ended. It wasn't just dark, it was empty. The grand foyer, which should have been dominated by a gilded console table and that enormous, ostentatious mirror, was a barren cavern. The walls were naked, showing faint rectangles of lighter paint where pictures had once hung. The cavernous living room to her left was a void. The custom-designed 12-person sofa, the silk Persian rug that had cost more than a luxury car, the Italian marble coffee table, the entire curated collection of her life, gone, vanished. Her mind struggled to process the scene. Had they been robbed? But there was no sign of a break-in, no shattered glass, no splintered wood. This was something else. This was a systematic erasure. And then she saw him. In the center of the vast, empty living room, placed exactly where the marble coffee table used to be, was a single piece of furniture. A simple, unadorned wooden chair. And sitting in it was Liam. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was directed toward the large picture window, which now framed the vibrant sunset without the obstruction of heavy silk curtains. He was perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a man waiting for a train, patient and unbothered. The sight was so bizarre, so completely outside the realm of her experience, that for a moment she could only stare, her mouth agape. He must have heard her enter, but he gave no sign. He simply continued to watch the sky. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken things. It was he who finally broke it, his voice calm and even, as if he were commenting on the weather. "The sunset is beautiful tonight, isn't it?" he said, still not turning to look at her. "Without all the clutter, you can really appreciate the view." The sheer, baffling normalcy of the statement shattered her paralysis. A tidal wave of fury washed over her, drowning out the fear. "Liam, what is this? What in God's name have you done? Where is everything? Where is our furniture?" He finally turned his head, and his eyes met hers across the empty expanse. There was no anger in his expression, no sadness, no emotion at all that she could recognize. It was an unnerving serenity, the calm at the center of a hurricane. "I believe you mean, where is my furniture?" he corrected her gently. "And the answer is, it's in storage, perfectly safe. I had it all moved on Friday." "Storage?" she shrieked, the words sounding absurd. "Why? Is this some kind of sick joke? A surprise? Did you redecorate?" Hope, however faint, flickered in her mind. Maybe this was some grand, misguided romantic gesture. Liam slowly stood up from the chair. He was wearing simple dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater. He looked taller, somehow, more solid, in the empty room. "No, Laura," he said, his voice retaining its quiet, devastating calm. "This isn't a joke. It's a clarification." "A clarification?" Laura repeated the word, her voice laced with incredulous fury. "You gut our home. You throw away everything we own, and you call it a clarification? Have you lost your mind?" She strode toward him, her heels echoing like gunshots in the empty room. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to provoke some kind of reaction from him, other than this infuriating, placid calm. "I didn't throw anything away," Liam replied, standing his ground as she approached. "As I said, your belongings are in a secure, climate-controlled storage unit. The key and the address are on the kitchen counter. You are free to retrieve them at your convenience." "My belongings?" she spat. "They are our belongings, Liam. This is our house." "That," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even quieter, which was somehow more menacing, "is the primary point that requires clarification." He reached into the inner pocket of his sweater and pulled out a neatly folded document. He held it out to her. "This is the deed to this house. It was purchased on May 12th, 6 years ago. Please note the name on the title." She snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes scanning the legal text. She saw the address, the lot number, and then the owner's name. Liam Carter, solely. Her name was nowhere on it. This is a mistake," she stammered, the paper trembling in her hand. "My father's lawyers handled this. My family's money—" "No, Laura," he interrupted, his voice firm but still without rancor. "Your family's money was not involved. This house, the land it sits on, and every fixture within it were purchased with funds from my personal accounts that I held long before we were married. Your father's lawyers merely reviewed the paperwork, at my expense, to give him a sense of involvement." The foundation of her world began to crumble. "Your personal accounts? What personal accounts? You run a tiny architectural firm." He allowed a small, sad smile to touch his lips. "Yes, my little firm, as you and your father so enjoy calling it, Orion Design Solutions. It was never just an architectural firm, Laura. It was a specialized consultancy. We focused on structural efficiency and material science for large-scale commercial and government projects. It was a niche market, but a very, very profitable one." He paused, letting the information sink in. "I founded it a decade ago. 2 years before I met you, I sold it to a multinational engineering conglomerate. The sale was private, and I insisted on a stringent non-disclosure agreement because I had no desire for the kind of attention that sort of wealth brings. I wanted a quiet life." Laura stared at him, her mind reeling, refusing to connect the dots. It was impossible. The man standing before her, the man she had considered a mild-mannered, moderately successful, but ultimately unimpressive accessory to her life, was a phantom, a fabrication. "You're lying," she whispered, the accusation weak, desperate. "Am I?" he asked softly. "Think about it, Laura. Where did you think the money came from? The cars, the vacations, the five-figure sums you drop on a single shopping trip. The seed money I loaned your father to rescue his company 3 years ago?" He began to walk slowly around the empty room, his hands clasped behind his back. He was no longer just her husband. He was a lecturer in a classroom of her own ignorance. "Your father's family trust ran dry years ago, Laura. He's a terrible businessman, all bluster and no strategy. For the past 5 years, I have been the sole source of your family's financial stability. I funneled money into Richard's company through a series of anonymous investments to keep it afloat. I set up a trust in your name and made deposits into it every month, which your father then presented to you as an allowance from the Vance estate. I did it all to protect your pride, to allow you and your family to maintain the illusion of your own superiority." He stopped in front of her, his gray eyes searching hers. "I did it because I loved you. And I thought that eventually you might learn to see me for who I was, not for what you wanted me to be. I thought you might learn to offer respect, not just tolerance. I was wrong." This was the quiet bomb, the softly spoken revelation that vaporized her reality. Every memory of the past 5 years reconfigured itself in her mind. Every condescending remark from her father, every dismissive laugh from her, every time she had felt a pang of pity for her struggling husband, it was all a lie. She had not been the benevolent princess, allowing a commoner into her castle. She had been the court jester, performing in a palace built and paid for by the man she mocked. The sheer, staggering weight of the humiliation hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. The deed slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the bare marble floor. And just for the sake of absolute clarity, Liam continued, his voice now holding a sliver of ice, I know you weren't in Aspen. The St. Regis in the Maldives is lovely this time of year, isn't it? I hope you and Mark had a wonderful time. You certainly paid enough for it. He knew. He knew everything. The carefully constructed walls of her life didn't just have cracks in them. They were gone. And she was standing, exposed and shivering, in the ruins. Laura's first instinct was denial, a primal, reflexive rejection of a reality too punishing to accept. No, she breathed, shaking her head. No, you're making this up. It's a cruel, twisted fantasy to hurt me. Is it? Liam asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. He reached into his pocket again and this time pulled out his phone. He swiped the screen and turned it to face her. It was a photo from her own private social media account, a picture of her and Mark clinking champagne glasses on the deck of an overwater bungalow. In the background, a turquoise ocean stretched to the horizon. The caption read, "Another perfect day in paradise." The post was geotagged, the St. Regis Vomuli Resort, Maldives. The sight of the photo, her own digital betrayal displayed so clinically, shattered the last vestiges of her denial. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, the cold of the marble seeping through her expensive clothes. Sobs racked her body, not of sorrow or remorse, but of pure, unadulterated shock and self-pity. Her world had been inverted. The pauper was a king, and she, the queen, was nothing. How could you? She gasped between sobs. How could you lie to me for all these years? A flicker of genuine emotion finally crossed Liam's face. A deep, profound weariness. I didn't lie, Laura. I was just quiet. You never asked. You and your family were so convinced of your own narrative that you never bothered to look at the facts. You saw what you wanted to see, a simple man, easily managed, who was lucky to be in your orbit. The truth was always there. You just never had the curiosity or the respect to look for it. As if on cue, the sound of a car screeching to a halt in the driveway cut through the air, followed by the slam of car doors. A moment later, the front door, which Laura had left ajar, was thrown open with a crash. Richard Vance stormed in, his face purple with rage, Eleanor trailing anxiously behind him. "Laura, what is going on?" Richard bellowed, his eyes sweeping over the empty room before landing on Liam. What have you done? Laura called me hysterical. She said you'd lost your mind." Liam didn't even seem startled by the intrusion. He simply turned to face his father-in-law with the same serene composure. "Richard, Eleanor, welcome. Please come in, though I'm afraid we're short on seating." Richard ignored the jibe. He marched toward Liam, his chest puffed out, every inch the indignant patriarch ready to defend his daughter's honor. "I want an explanation, and I want one now. You will put everything back the way it was, and then you and I will have a very serious discussion about your future." It was the voice he had used to intimidate business rivals and subordinates for 40 years. It was a voice accustomed to obedience. It had no effect on Liam. "There's nothing to discuss, Richard," Liam said calmly. "I am divorcing your daughter. This is my house, so she will be the one leaving. That is the long and short of it." "Your house?" Richard scoffed, a contemptuous laugh escaping his lips. "Don't be ridiculous. This house was paid for with Vance money. You will do as you're told, or I will crush that pathetic little firm of yours into dust." The threat hung in the air, pathetic and toothless. Liam simply raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He walked over to the kitchen counter, where a slim leather portfolio lay. He opened it and took out a second document. He handed it not to Richard, but to Eleanor. "Eleanor, you've always been the more astute of the two of you," he said, his voice softening with something that might have been pity. "Perhaps you should read this." Eleanor took the document, her hands shaking slightly. Richard tried to snatch it from her, but she held it fast. Her eyes scanned the pages, which were filled with columns of numbers, dates, and company names. Her breath hitched. Her face, already pale, turned as white as the marble floor. "Richard," she whispered, her voice a strangled thread. These are the holding companies, the ones our financial advisors set up for the anonymous investor." Richard stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "The investor, Richard," she said, her voice rising with hysteria. "The one who's been propping up Vance Industries for the last 3 years. The one whose divestment this week nearly wiped us out." She looked from the paper to Liam, her eyes wide with dawning, horrific understanding. "It was you. It was you, all along." Richard froze, his blustering rage deflating like a punctured balloon. He looked at Liam, truly looked at him, for the first time. He saw not the mild-mannered son-in-law he could bully, but a stranger, a man with cold, calculating eyes who held the puppet strings to his entire existence. "And as of Wednesday," Liam said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "I have instructed my financial managers to cease all support for Vance Industries and to call in all outstanding loans. The paperwork was filed this morning. I believe your lawyers will be in touch on Monday. I'm sorry, Richard, but as you always say, it's not personal, it's just business." He used Richard's own callous mantra against him, the words a perfect, devastating echo. Richard stumbled backward, looking for support, and put a hand on the bare wall to steady himself. The Vances, who had entered the house like a conquering army, now looked like shipwreck survivors, clinging to the wreckage of a world they no longer recognized. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up, and they were standing on the wrong side of the foundation. The silence that followed Liam's final pronouncement was heavier and more absolute than any that had come before. It was the silence of utter defeat. Richard Vance, a man whose entire identity was built on a scaffolding of noise and bluster, was speechless. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish on a deck, but no sound emerged. Eleanor seemed to have shrunk, her shoulders hunched, the financial summary clutched in her hand like a death warrant. Laura, still on the floor, looked from her parents' shattered faces to Liam's calm, composed one. The last desperate hope that this was all a nightmare, a horrible mistake, died within her. This was real. The life she had known was over. "You can't do this," she finally whispered, the words a plea rather than a demand. "Liam, please. We can talk about this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Liam looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Which part were you wrong about, Laura? Were you wrong to cheat on me? Or were you wrong to get caught? Were you wrong to disrespect me for 5 years? Or are you just sorry that the man you disrespected turned out to be the source of your comfort? Your apology is a reaction to your circumstances, not a reflection of your character. It's worthless." Each word was a precise, surgical cut, delivered without malice, but with devastating accuracy. He was mirroring her own behavior back at her, showing her the hollowness of her own actions and words. Eleanor, seeing her husband defeated and her daughter broken, made a last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. She adopted the tone she used with garden club members in charity boards, one of reason and gentle persuasion. "Liam," she began, taking a step forward, "we are family. Families make mistakes. Surely we can find a way through this. Think of all the good years. Think of the life you built together." "The life I built," Liam corrected her calmly, "and I did think of it. I thought of every dinner where I was the punchline of your husband's jokes, and you sat by and smiled. I thought of every family event where I was treated like an employee. I thought of every time you advised your daughter that she had to manage me, as if I were a difficult child and not her husband. You were not a silent enabler, Eleanor. You were a willing participant. You are just as culpable as she is. He turned his attention back to Laura. I have rented a storage unit for you. The first 6 months are prepaid. After that, it's your responsibility. The keys and the address are on the counter. I have also had a cashier's check for $50,000 drawn up. It should be enough to help you get on your feet, find an apartment, and start over. He gestured to her designer suitcases, still sitting forlornly on the path outside. You have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings from this house. Anything left behind after 7 p.m. tomorrow will be donated to charity. The cars, as you've noticed, are gone. They were leased through my personal corporation, and those leases have been terminated. Your credit cards were supplementary cards on my accounts. They have all been canceled. He laid out the consequences with the dispassionate clarity of a lawyer reading a will. There was no room for negotiation. He had thought of everything. He had closed every door, sealed every exit. He was not just ending the marriage. He was dismantling the entire infrastructure that had supported her life of casual cruelty. As for you, Richard, Liam said, turning to the broken man by the door, I would suggest you hire the best bankruptcy lawyer you can find, though I doubt it will do much good. Richard finally found his voice, a ragged, desperate croak. My company, my legacy, you've destroyed me. No, Richard, Liam said, his voice holding not a trace of triumph, only a final, weary judgment. You destroyed yourself. You built your legacy on a foundation of arrogance and debt. I just removed the supports. A well-designed structure can stand on its own. With that, he walked past them, not even glancing at Laura as he stepped over her legs. He picked up the slim leather portfolio from the counter and walked toward the stairs. You have 24 hours, he repeated, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space as he ascended to the second floor. A locksmith will be here tomorrow evening to change the locks again. I suggest you use the time wisely. They heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of a door closing softly on the upper level. And then they were alone, the three of them, in the silent, cavernous shell of a life that was no longer theirs. Laura remained on the floor, the full, crushing weight of her new reality settling upon her. She had come home expecting a quiet house. She had found a quiet apocalypse. 6 months later, the city skyline was a tapestry of glittering lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Liam's new home. It was not a house, but a penthouse apartment, a space defined by clean lines, minimalist design, and an overwhelming sense of peace. It was the architectural embodiment of the man himself, uncluttered, purposeful, and possessing a quiet, unshakable strength. He was sitting with Arthur, his lawyer, in the living area, 2 glasses of single malt scotch resting on the polished, concrete coffee table between them. The divorce is finalized, Arthur said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She didn't contest any of it. Her lawyer knew they didn't have a leg to stand on. And her parents? Liam asked, his gaze fixed on the distant lights. Richard Vance declared bankruptcy 2 months ago. The company was liquidated. From what I hear, they sold the estate and moved into a small condo in a less prestigious part of town. He's trying to find work as a consultant, but his reputation is in tatters. Liam nodded slowly. There was no pleasure in the news, no sense of victory. It was simply the logical outcome of a flawed design, the inevitable collapse of a poorly built structure. Poetic justice was often less about poetry and more about physics. Laura tried to call again last week, Liam said, gesturing to his phone, which sat dark on the table. She left another voicemail. Are you going to listen to it? Arthur asked. Liam shook his head. There's no point. I know what it will say. A mix of apologies, accusations, and pleas. It's all about what she's lost, not about what she did wrong. She's mourning the loss of a lifestyle, not the loss of a relationship. He had listened to the first few messages in the weeks following their separation. They had been a predictable progression. First came the rage, filled with threats and insults. Then came the bargaining, with promises to change and desperate declarations of love. Finally came the pitiful pleading, but never, in any of them, was there a genuine acknowledgement of her own failings, of the profound disrespect that had been the true poison in their marriage. He deleted the new voicemail without hearing it, the same way he had deleted all the others. It was not an act of cruelty, but one of self-preservation. He was building a new life, and its foundation had to be solid, free from the rot of the past. His phone buzzed with a new text message. A photo appeared on the screen. It was a picture of a half-finished building, its steel skeleton stark against a bright blue sky. It was the community arts center he was designing and funding, a pro bono project in a neighborhood that had been long neglected. The text was from the site foreman, a woman named Sarah who had a no-nonsense attitude and a brilliant mind for logistics. The message read, "The main trusses are in place. Looks good, boss." Liam smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. This was real. This was substance. This was creating something of value where there had been nothing. It was the work he had always wanted to do, the work he had put on hold to play a role in a domestic drama he had never auditioned for. A glimpse into Laura's new life came unintentionally a week later. He was in a bookstore, browsing the architecture section, when he heard a familiar voice. It was hushed, but carried the unmistakable cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. It was Eleanor Vance. He glanced over the top of a bookshelf and saw her with Laura. They were in the self-help section. Laura looked diminished. She wore simple clothes that didn't fit quite right. Her hair lacked its usual expensive sheen. The confidence that had once radiated from her like a force field was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful slump in her shoulders. Eleanor was pressing a book into her hands, its cover bearing a title in large, cheerful letters. "Embrace your new beginning." Laura snatched the book and shoved it back on the shelf. "Stop it, Mother," she hissed. "None of this is helping. It's his fault. All of it." Even now, Liam thought with a sigh, even after losing everything, the habit of blame was too ingrained to break. It was easier to cast yourself as the victim than to confront the uncomfortable truth of your own complicity. He turned and walked away before they could see him. He felt nothing, no anger, no pity, not even the faint satisfaction of having been proven right. He simply felt disconnected. They were characters from a book he had finished reading long ago. Their story was over. His was just beginning. The following spring, the Community Arts Center was nearly complete. Liam walked through the bustling construction site, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut wood and drying paint. He ran his hand along the smooth, curved wall of the main entryway, a feature he had designed to feel like an embrace, welcoming everyone who entered. He had poured himself into this project, not just his money, but his time and his passion. He knew every joint, every beam, every window placement. He had worked alongside the construction crew, sharing coffee from a thermos and trading stories with men and women who measured worth in calluses and sweat, not in stock portfolios and brand names. He had found a sense of belonging here that he had never felt in the sterile, opulent rooms of his former life. Sarah, the site foreman, walked up beside him, a hard hat pushed back on her head. "It's going to be something special, Liam," she said, her eyes surveying the grand, light-filled atrium. "I hope so," he replied. "I want it to be a place where people feel seen, where they can discover a part of themselves they didn't know they had." He was, he realized, talking as much about himself as he was about the building. For years, he had allowed himself to be unseen, to be defined by others' shallow perceptions. He had hidden his own strength, his own value, behind a facade of meekness, all in the name of a love that was never returned in kind. The experience had taught him a difficult but vital lesson. True worth is not an external valuation. It is not measured by the car you drive, the house you own, or the name you carry. It is an internal structure, an architecture of the soul. It is built from integrity, fortified with self-respect, and illuminated by purpose. Arrogance and status are like cheap, prefabricated walls. They look impressive from a distance, but they have no load-bearing capacity. They collapse under the slightest pressure. He no longer felt any bitterness toward Laura or her family. They were simply people who had never learned the difference between price and value. They had mistaken his quietness for weakness and his generosity for foolishness. And in the end, their miscalculations had cost them everything. Theirs was a cautionary tale, a blueprint of how not to build a life. His freedom had been expensive, but it was absolute. It was the freedom to be himself, without apology or explanation. It was the freedom to invest his time and resources not in impressing people who didn't matter, but in building things that did. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. And it was, by any measure, a worthy exchange. He looked up at the intricate network of steel beams and wooden trusses that formed the ceiling, a complex dance of tension and compression that created a vast, open space. It was strong, it was honest, it was beautiful. He had designed it, and he had helped to build it. It would stand for 100 years. The world is full of people who judge a book by its cover, who mistake a quiet demeanor for a lack of strength. The most powerful people are often the ones who don't need to announce their power. They simply live it. They build, they create, and they wait. And when the time comes, they reveal the true and unshakable foundation upon which they stand. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who constantly underestimated you? What do you think is the most important foundation for a strong life? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. We cherish the community we're building here and read every story you share. If you found this story of quiet strength and satisfying justice compelling, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates integrity over arrogance. Thank you for watching, and remember to build your own life on solid ground.